In the 880s, the Franks, like the Anglo-Saxons across the Channel, found themselves hard pressed by relentless Viking raids. The Annals of St. Vast outlines the menace faced by the likes of Carloman II and the Emperor Charles the Fat. For anyone with a knowledge of the history of the Vikings, the description of their activities given by the Annals of St. Vast will have a familiar ring to it. In 882, the Vikings were, to use the Annals terminology, firmly entrenched and causing widespread devastation to West Francia, ruled by Carloman II at that time. The predictable burning and pillaging that followed the Vikings wherever they went was truly horrifying, leaving ordinary people, those lucky enough to survive, homeless and forced to flee desperately. Yet Carloman was, as king, no weakling, despite his tender years. The year before, in 881, he and his brother Louis III had defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Cercourt-en-Vermeuil, killing thousands of the enemy in the process. With Carloman aged only 16 at the time of the battle, and Louis no more than a year or two older. Clearly, they were both brave and capable young men. But Louis would succumb to a strange accident that would leave Carloman to face the Viking threat alone. The story goes that Louis had caught sight of a girl he had taken a liking to, but it seems the feeling wasn't mutual, as the girl hurried back to her family's home. Louis, not to be put off and on horseback, rode as quickly as he could after her, but too quickly as it proved. He rode into a low beam that hung over a door, fracturing his skull and dying from his injuries. Despite the obvious bleakness of the situation confronting him, Carloman managed to inflict another defeat on the Vikings, with the annals stating that around 1,000 of the Northmen were killed on this second occasion. But as always, the raiders were not to be deterred by an isolated defeat. Indeed, it would take much more than that to put them off. Instead, they took to their ships and raided further north, where houses were burned to the ground, churches and monasteries destroyed and looted, and their inhabitants brutally killed or sold into slavery. Ordinary people could find no protection forthcoming, nor could they expect any mercy as they were cut down with fire and sword, or else they fell victim to the inevitable famines that followed the burning of crops and fields, and the seizing and killing of cattle. The situation for Carloman was desperate, but he did find help in the assistance of a particularly brave abbot named Hugo. A man of some esteem and influence, Hugo gathered together an army and joined the king. Together, they went in pursuit of the Vikings, chasing them through woodland and forests, before the raiders once again took to their ships. But despite these proactive and decisive actions on the part of Hugo and Carloman, the violence and bloodshed didn't stop. In 883, Flanders was devastated, and the royal army, led by Carloman himself, was forced to flee in the face of Viking hostility. Across West Francia, the story was the same: grim, bloody, tragic. The Annals paints a truly sorrowful picture. It says, through all the streets lay bodies of the clergy, of laymen, nobles, and others, of women, children, and suckling babes. There was no road nor place where the dead did not lie, and all who saw Christian people slaughtered were filled with sorrow and despair. Carloman was just one of many rulers faced with this terrible problem in the late 800s. He was not yet out of his teens, yet he had faced the Vikings in a commendable fashion. However, despite his bravery, the violence had not ceased, and now his nobles sought other methods other than military to protect the kingdom. They turned to a Dane who had been baptized for help. He was named Siegfried and loyal to Carloman. Siegfried was urged to go and treat with his fellow Danes, with the Franks offering them financial tribute in exchange for peace. Siegfried did as he was asked, and a sum was agreed upon, with hostages exchanged between the two sides. However, whilst the Franks were raising the money owed, the Vikings continued to burn and loot, which must have raised doubts already existent in all likelihood whether the Vikings would keep to the peace. Eventually, the tribute was handed over, and for the time being, the Vikings retreated. Not long after, Carloman died in a somewhat bizarre hunting accident. He sustained injuries inadvertently inflicted upon him by an attendant who was trying to protect the king from a wild boar. A few days later, Carloman, aged no older than 18, succumbed to his injuries, and Charles the Fat, the emperor, took control over West Francia. The peace that had been agreed now meant very little, as heathen rage was once again let loose on the Franks, as they had done several decades before under the command of Ragnar Lothbrok. The Vikings, led by Siegfried, no longer loyal now that Carloman was dead, laid siege to Paris, where they met with stubborn resistance. Time and again, the defenders of Paris drove the invaders back. They were led in their resistance by Count Otto, who would later become king, and the Bishop of Paris, Goslin. Bishop Goslin, wearied from the seemingly endless siege, entered into negotiations with the Danes, but died before they could be concluded. This proved to be a psychological blow for those still holding out inside the walls of Paris. But Count Otto rallied the people of Paris, and the fighting continued. But seeing their plight was becoming increasingly desperate, Otto left Paris in secret to seek assistance from Emperor Charles. On his return, Otto had to fight his way back in to the city, with his horse being killed underneath him. Nonetheless, his return cheered the defenders of Paris up greatly. Charles had received Otto's message and arrived with a large army, but instead of trying to destroy the Vikings, Charles, in rather gutless fashion, paid them further tribute and allowed them to depart without taking up arms against them. In this backdrop, it's not hard to see why he was removed from power not long after. What we have gone over here is just a few short years of Viking history. Familiar themes occur here as they do in the Viking raids on England and elsewhere. Desperate rulers, some cowardice, but also a great deal of courage, terrible violence, and ultimately senseless destruction and the ruin of innocence.